Board. Okay, so we're here today with Dr. Shannon Brooks from Monticello College. We're very grateful that he's agreed to join our homeschool group and community. This class is being recorded. We'll also share it potentially with some of our contacts. So Shannon has been a great friend and a mentor to our family for over a decade. He's been on our ranch. We've gotten to know his family over the time that we've been associated with Monticello College and the work that he is doing of teaching true and correct principles, moving forward the cause of liberty, and helping people to be able to experience freedom. So today we're going to be talking about the new economy. Shannon he's a father, he's a teacher, he's a husband, got 6 children, right, Shannon?
Yep.
And he is the co-founder of Monticello College, located in Monticello, Utah. So welcome, Shannon, and we'll let you add any other clarification to who you are if you'd like to, and then just jump right in.
I'm the chief cook and bottle washer here. And they won't let me move up until I do better at that. So I could be stuck in that position for a while. Okay, well, let's get rolling here. This is going to be a lot of information. So if you have questions, as Jared mentioned, please send them to him. I will stop a couple times and we'll take questions from you. You can unmute, but it's really important, just like we always say with this program, it's really important that if you don't get a concept, you got to ask a question. Raise your hand, let Jared get the question to me. I'll stop, I'll go back. If you get stuck on a concept and you don't get it clarified, that's going to keep you from being able to really focus on the rest of it. So it's worth our time to stop for a second. I've tried to clarify spots in here that I think might be troublesome for some people. And but having said that, let's go ahead and get started. So let's see. Well, it looks like, Jared, I'm not going to be able to. Oh, let's see. All right.
Yeah, just make sure you're hovering over your presentation and not over Zoom, and it should flow through your slides.
Okay. All right, we're good. Okay, so in 1992, which is way older than most of you watching this thing, there was a guy running for president. You may have heard of him. His name was Bill Clinton, and he had a campaign office in Little Rock, Arkansas, and in their office on a window, they had taped a list of things that they were supposed to remember to talk about to promote the campaign. We're doing this, we're doing that, we're not doing this. And one of the things on this list was to remind them to talk about how important it was to talk about the economy. And so it said, "It's the economy, stupid." And that became known by the press. And so everybody started using this phrase. It was a joke. They were making fun of these guys. And so you'll see this all over the place. Now, you don't see this much today because, it's some time. It's been 30 years since all that. But the economy was really important in 1992. And of course, it's important today. It's vital to a meaningful life today. The problem is that most of us don't understand what the economy is. I'm going to try. Okay, can you guys see that? When
Yep.
I have it the other way, Jared, it's too, I can't see my slides. Is there a way I can get rid of or slide this over or something? Hold on a second. Let me see. Can I? Oh,
I'm not sure if it works with that application. If you go into presenter view, if that's an option, that'll help. But we can see it. It's a little small to read, but
okay. Let me go back then, and I'll try to wing it here. Okay, there we go. So the word economy, we're going to spend time talking about economy. So we're going to start with the word. It comes from 2 Greek words, oikos meaning home or family, and nomos meaning law or order. So it makes sense, right? The concept of economy is having a well-ordered home, a well-ordered family, having a set of rules that you use to engage in how you live your life. Okay. And it's really important to identify that the concept of economy starts with the family unit. Aristotle said that the family starts with a man and a wife, and then they have kids, right? Man and a wife is a marriage, but as soon as they have children, you have a family, that's a home now. And so this whole idea of economy starts with that basic unit of society. Over time, as we got greater populations in cities, they started using the word economy for a city, then for a state, then for a country. Now we have a global economy, but it all goes back to the idea of there's got to be a system in place that you follow. There's rules to how this thing works. Okay. All right. And what is the economy? Well, it's everything that you see listed here and more. I'm sure I missed some areas, but buying and selling, business, it's income and taxes, interest rates, consumerism, government benefits. It's all those things rolled up in one, and probably a lot more that you could add. That's what the economy is. It's super important, this economy thing that we're talking about, because it impacts everything you do. It impacts the kind of job you have, the kind of money you have, the house you live in, the car you drive, the phone. It even impacts whether you can get toilet paper or not, right? 2 years ago, we learned that lesson. The kind of vacations you take, what kind of savings, everything involved in your life is impacted by the economy. Super, super important. The problem is, most of us don't know that much about it, and most of us don't spend a lot of time thinking about the economy. We do a little bit. You know, we think about unemployment, especially when we're unemployed. Most of us don't think about unemployment if we have gainful employment. Food supply, insurance, a little bit. The reality, though, is the economy has much more involved in it than just those few things. We have GDP, Social Security, we have quantitative easing, unfunded obligations, special draw rights. There's a lot to this economy thing, and it's because it's on a national and global level, these things, even though we may not even understand them, totally impact our lives. And I submit that it's really important for us to know more about these things because they do impact us. So we're going to jump right into it. We're going to look at a chart here. And before we do, we're going to make this bold statement. And that bold statement is the current American economy, the way the economy is being run right now, the rules that we're using to run the economy right now are unstable, unsustainable. It cannot last. Now, that's a pretty bold statement. Let me give you some evidence of that. If you look at this chart right now, there's a lot of information on this chart. At the very bottom, it says source. It says CBO. That's Congressional Budget Office. The Congressional Budget Office, which isn't always accurate, but their job is to take ideas that Congress is going to create or implement, and they run it past. It's like taking a business idea and running it past your accountant. Hey, do you think this will work, or will this not work, right? So based on how, and you can see right there, right in the middle, it says 2011. That's when this chart was done. And in 2011, this is the CBO saying, based on the rules that Congress is using right now in terms of debt and budget and all those things, if we keep on the way we are now, the red shows you where we're going to be when we compare debt to GDP. Now, at this point, most people go, what? So let's talk about this a little bit. What is debt to GDP? Well, what is GDP? Can somebody read that for me? Well, you know, actually, since you guys are all muted, I'll read it. And I can't see all of it because that thing's in the way. Gross domestic product is the total monetary or market value, I think it says, of finished goods and services produced within a country's borders in a certain period of time, I think is what it says. We generally talk about GDP in terms of a year. They actually collect all the data for GDP once a quarter, and then they add it all up at the end of the year. This means personal domestic spending, consumer spending, business investment, running of the business, that's all the government employees, military, all that kind of thing, and then exports. And you add all that together, and that's the GDP. Now, for most people, we still go over heads because we don't talk about this stuff. Maybe domestic consumer spending, but business investment, we don't know much about that. or running the business or the government. You know, there are millions of employees for the government. Exports, we may not be sure what those are. So we're going to go a little farther with this. All right, come on. When we talk about debt to GDP, debt pretty much everybody understands. That's money that we owe, money that we've borrowed, okay? But what is GDP? GDP, if you were to take your paycheck every month, let's say you made $3,000 a month, every month, $3,000. At the end of the year, you're going to add that up and you've got $36,000. $36,000 would be your personal GDP. That's the value of all the effort you put into making money that year. That's the total value of your annual effort. Okay. So you guys are going to have to shake your heads. Does that make sense? Just so I know that you're getting this. GDP is basically like your national paycheck, okay, for a country. So what we're doing with this chart is we're comparing the debt we have as a nation to our income we have as a nation. Most of you are too young, but any of your parents, if you have a mortgage on a home, I guarantee that you have gone in, and when you went to the bank to get a loan, they did a debt to income comparison. If you have too much debt to income, they won't loan you money. Okay. So that's all we're doing for the nation. We're comparing how much we owe to how much we make. All right. Now I broke this down even further. So people who struggle to understand GDP, we take the debt divided by the income and we times by 100, and that's how we get this number. So if our debt is $50 and our GDP, our income is $100, we divide those, we get 0.5 times 100. That gives us 50% debt to GDP. Okay, that's not great, but it's not bad. If we have a lot of debt, then let's say we have $100 in debt and we only have $50 in income, we divide those, that gives us 2 times 100. It gives us 200% debt to GDP. That means we owe twice as much as what we make. That's not a good position. Look down in the lower left-hand corner of this chart. If your percentage is 100, that means your debt and your income are equal. If your percentage is above 100, that means your debt is greater than your income. If your percentage is less than 100, that means your debt is less than your income. All right, let's stop right here, Jared. If you have a question, please unmute your mic so you can ask me the question directly. You got to understand debt to GDP before we go on, because it's going to be all through the presentation.
So I was just wondering, so the GDP, that includes like everything that everybody in the nation is producing, not just the government.
No, it's everybody. Yep.
Okay.
So it's just imagine it's the paycheck for the whole nation. If you guys sell cows, right, Selena? All that meat you sell, that's part of GDP. If Jonathan over here is, he has a bicycle shop and he sells bicycles, that's part of GDP. Okay, everybody.
Well, maybe the problem is everybody's switched over to cryptocurrency, and so they can't track it. So maybe GDP is a whole lot better than we really think it is, right?
Well, I wish that was the case. I'm sure it's not. And we know that the government's going to start clamping down on crypto right away. Why? Because they want to create their own crypto. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's all going away with the new reset, with the great reset and all that coming. But that's another lecture, another time. Okay.
Okay. I think it's clear.
Go ahead.
I think it's clear. GDP, debt.
Perfect. All right, let's move on. So now let's take a look at this chart. You can see in World War II, about 1945, we were at basically 100% debt to GDP. We had borrowed a bunch of money, we were spending a bunch of money, but we were at war, so it made sense. We were borrowing money, making tanks. But as soon as the war was over, that debt and borrowing went away, and you can see GDP dropped drastically down into the 60s, 70s, 80s, stabilized somewhere around 30 to 40%, up and down a little bit. But we hit 2011, and Congress around 2008, 9, 10 in there started really borrowing a lot of money. This was the Obama years. started borrowing a lot of money. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not dishing on Obama. Plenty of Republican presidents had spent lots of money too. The Bushes, Reagan. I'm just saying here, we see this all of a sudden a huge increase of borrowing money. And the CBO is saying with this chart that if we stay on the rules that we're following right now in 2011, here's the increase. You're going to see an increase. If you look at that 2030, this is saying about 2030, 35, we're going to be at 200% debt to GDP. Something like that. All right, let's go to the next chart. This chart is a little more expanded, same time period. And you can see by 2020, they're projecting that we're going to have over 100% debt to GDP. Does anybody know what the debt to GDP is right now? It's about 110 to 120%. Now, the problem with that is I have a book on my shelf, and it talks about nations, the finance of nations for the last 800 years in Europe. Every time there was a nation that got 80% debt to GDP, so it owed, if it had $100 in its income, it owed $80, right? Anytime you hit 80% debt to GDP and you stayed there for any length of time, your economy generally tanked and you did not come out of it. Just like we saw in Greece, we saw in Spain, we saw in Venezuela right now, we're seeing in Venezuela, we saw in the Weimar Republic in Germany. There's lots of examples. When you hit that high level of debt to GDP and you hold it for a while, you will start to tank. We're at about 110 to 120% debt to GDP. If that doesn't alarm you, it should. Okay. And then you can see, I can't see the rest of my chart, but it goes up from there. And it's projecting, 150, 200% debt to GDP. All right. Another way to look at debt, national debt, is they take the total number of debt and they divide it by the population, every man, woman, and child. In 1970, they did that. And if every man, woman, and child was to kick in their portion of the national debt, say tomorrow, we're all going to pay off the national debt. In 1970, it would have required $6,600. By 2008, it was up to almost $20,000. 2014, almost $40,000. And it's projected by 2030, it'll be $90,000. Well, if you look to the right, you'll see that we actually hit $90,000 at the beginning of 2022. So good news is we're 8 years ahead of projection. That's not a happy thing. That means by 2020 or by 2030, we'll probably be easily well over $100,000 in debt for every man, woman, and child if we were to pay off the national debt tomorrow. All right. So back to my original statement. This is an unsustainable situation. We cannot maintain forever on this plan. Okay. How does it impact us in individual homes? Well, we can see destabilization in employment. We can see increased taxes, supply chain complications, all these things we're experiencing right now. This nonsense that's going on over with Russia and Ukraine, it's going to drive gas prices up, all this kind of stuff. Inflated home prices. In little tiny Monticello, right now, a 2-bedroom, 2-bath house, the most basic house you can imagine, $250,000 in Monticello. Craziness. The only group that's struggling more than established families are new college graduates. These guys are dealing with all the same issues, but they're also dealing with first-time employment issues and repayment of college debt issues. When I went through school, when Jared went through school, Selena and others, those of us who are a little bit older, there was still college debt you could get, but nothing like they have today. So the average kid is graduating out of college today with anything from 30 to 50, some cases $100,000 in debt. They can't find a job that matches up with what they went to school with. So now they have this huge burden of debt and they can't find a job. And it's very problematic. One of the reasons that leading to that is that we have 4 times more people looking for a job 25 and older with a college degree than we did in 1970. When you have 4 times more people with a college degree, everyone's got a, it seems like everybody's got a college degree, and it's not a special thing anymore. So you put all this time, all this effort, you acquired all this debt to get a certificate that it feels like everybody else already has. So it doesn't really buy you much like it used to. There are 2 primary drivers that lead to this unstable economy that we're in. One is called the national debt. That number is actually old. The latest numbers today puts us at 30 trillion, not 29 trillion. So that's what we call the public debt or the national debt. That's how much money we've borrowed that we have to pay back, okay? But then there's another number that's much, much larger than this that is never talked about. You never hear the politicians talking about it at all. And that's unfunded obligations. In fact, you can see somebody here has taken our it's the economy stupid and changed it to it's the unfunded liability stupid. What are unfunded obligations, unfunded liabilities? Well, the best way to explain this is if you look at Social Security. This was a program sold to us back in the late 40s, 50s. And this was an idea that if you pay into this program your whole working career, when you retire, you get benefits back. And it's a way to make sure you have an income when you're old and you can't work anymore. So for every person who's been paying into this, there is a stated promise by the government to take care of you when you graduate, when you retire. The problem is we have millions of people who have been promised a retirement through Social Security, but there's no money in a Social Security account to pay for it. Right now, for every dollar that we're putting in, we're spending $1.20, $1.30, $1.50. So there's more money going out than money coming in, which means there's no money in there. And we have all these people that are coming down the pike expecting that to be able to receive those benefits when they retire. Same thing with Medicaid, Medicare, pension plans, other state and local government plans. This unfunded obligation, these promises that have a dollar amount attached to them, range anywhere from 40 to $100 trillion. So you have to take the 30 trillion we already owe, money we borrowed, add it to the 100 trillion. You're now at $130 trillion owed by the government to the people or to other people they borrowed money from. That's an unsustainable situation. That's a scary place to be. This just shows you the blue, I think, is the unfunded obligations, and the red is the public debt. They'll talk about public debt all day, but in 2016, look at the unfunded obligations was 6 times greater than the public debt. That's problematic. And again, here you can see here in the red with $140 trillion owed. Each taxpayer owes about $900,000. When you're talking the full picture, debt and unfunded obligations, if we were to pay this off tomorrow, every member of American society, every citizen, every man, woman, and child would have to pay $900,000. This is not getting paid off next year. This isn't getting paid off in my lifetime. Jonathan, this is not getting paid off in your lifetime, nor your children's lifetime, nor your grandchildren's lifetime. Why? Well, because we have no concept of what a trillion is. 1 million seconds is 12 days. 1 billion seconds is 31 years. Look at the gap between those two, 1 million and 1 billion. What do you think the gap between 1 billion and 1 trillion is? 1 trillion seconds is 32,000 years. That's 320 centuries. The United States has not existed for 1 trillion seconds. Western Civ has not been around for 1 trillion seconds. If you spend $1 million every day, nonstop, it will take you almost 3,000 years to spend $1 trillion, and we owe 140 trillion. Unfunded obligations, national debt. It's an unsustainable situation. All right, I want to stop right here. If you've got a question you want to ask, go ahead and ask it, because I promise you, I'm going to show you some really cool stuff here in a minute. It's going to be really, really happy, but this is not the happy spot. Okay.
So looking back on that graph, at what point did we kind of reach the tipping point where it became like debt as a tool that works for the government for growth, and now it's just uncontrollable?
All I can tell you to answer that in a very general way is that about 2008, 2009 seems to be, if you look, there's a number of graphs I've seen where, you know, your debt's starting to come up, 2008, 2009, 2010, all of a sudden it goes like this, straight up. So about a decade ago is when we started going crazy. There's a reason for that. I won't get into it in this lecture, but there's a thing called the Great Reset. In fact, this isn't a conspiracy. There's a book called COVID-19, The Great Reset, and it's authored by Klaus Schwab, who is the chairman of the World Economic Forum. This is their book. They wrote it and printed it. They're very excited about what they're doing, and that includes putting every nation massively, massively, massively in debt like this. That's part of their plan. So we've been on this plan for about 10 years.
Does it summarize just basically leading to a one world government? Is that kind of the
yeah, but not in the way that you and I grew up thinking. It's a very different, it's sort of like you've heard of the industrial military complex. This was the idea of a relationship. Eisenhower identified this in 1961, where you had government working with military in such a way that the government would make sure we got into enough wars so that the industrial complex could produce enough guns and tanks and stuff. And then the government would pay top dollar for that stuff. And these guys are feeding each other. And so the military gets to be as big as it wants. And these industrialists get to make all this money. Well, we now have a new kind of complex. It's called the corporate global government complex. And it's not as simple as, you know, one world order and there's a bad guy. It's a little bit complicated, and they work it all out in the book. There's a great book by Glenn Beck if you want to get this to really understand it. And it's his book, but it's called The Great Reset as well. But make sure it's by Glenn Beck, and he'll walk you through all this stuff. And if you follow Glenn Beck at all, he can come across as very conspiracy. The beauty of his book is that he's got like 500 or 600 footnotes, which means you can go look up everything he's saying and you can find the source. And 90% of those footnotes are coming from the organizations themselves that are promoting this stuff. So it's not like it's hidden, just nobody's looking for it, right? Okay, ready to go? Let's keep going. Jonathan, am I scaring you away yet? No, we're good. Okay, all right.
We're right on track, brother.
Okay, so when you have problems of this magnitude, we're often told, hey, you got to think outside the box. What we're suggesting from Monticello College is the box is the problem. The set of rules we have for the economy and how we operate an economy, which means basically you get a job, you go to school, you get a degree, you get a job, you get a mortgage, you get a car payment, all those things. That is the problem. You got to change your mindset. We got to get rid of the box completely if we're going to find a new way to live independently and not be in debt and all those kind of things. So that's kind of what we're promoting here. The economy's broken. It's not going to be fixed. So what we're promoting is a thing called the new economy. And there are 4 principles that we're going to talk about, and then I'm going to roll out how this thing works. And just know that this isn't hypothetical. We have students at varying levels of this already applying this stuff, okay? So the first principle of the new economy is the idea of standard of living versus quality of life. Now, most people recognize that the idea of standard of living means stuff, and that quality life is happiness and tranquility. And if somebody's chasing stuff and possessions, I'm cool with that. If they want to do that, great. If somebody is focusing on happiness and tranquility and they want to live in a yurt That's cool too. Where I have a problem is when we have people in our society who think that you get quality of life by getting more stuff. Quality of life beyond the basic needs, shelter, food, clothing, loved ones. Although I don't know that you would consider loved ones as possessions or stuff. I think my kids thought that I, they were my slaves. But when we think that the way you get happy in life is getting more stuff, that's where we have a problem. And we have probably the largest consumer economy on the planet here in the United States. We think that buying more stuff makes us happy. How do I know this? Because everybody in this country, it seems like, when they get upset, they're unhappy, something's gone wrong in their life, what do? Grab the credit card, run down to the mall. We go buy a new shirt, new pair of pants, new dress, new hat, whatever. Come home 3 days later, we go put that hat on, and we go, oh man, I shouldn't have done that. I wish I hadn't spent that much money. Then I start to feel bad. How do I solve that? I go back to the mall and buy something else. And we have this cycle going on, right? And that's kind of our culture. We have people living in standard of livings that are way beyond the means, the money they make, their income, way beyond. It's called Clayton's Law. No matter what we make, we live about 10% above that, and then we cover it with debt and that kind of thing. Okay, so to go into the new economy, we have to understand the relationship between we have to understand what standard of living is. We have to understand what quality of life is, and we have to understand the proper relationship between the two. On campus, we have what are called austere facilities. What that means is it keeps the rain off, it keeps you warm. But outside of that, it's not too fancy. Why? Because we're taking kids who have grown up, have been in this consumer economy their entire lives, and we want them for the first time in their life to experience what it is to have just enough to get by, to be happy with, but it's not luxurious. So they can learn the difference between needs and wants. Most people think that all of their wants are actually needs, and it's not true. For example, on campus right now, until we get our water situation solved, we haul water onto campus, which means every student has a 3-minute shower. 5-minute shower, 5-minute shower. It was 3 minutes on the submarine, so I moved it up to 5. They have a 5-minute shower. They could stay in the shower all they want, but they get 5 minutes worth of water. We use about 15 gallons of water per person per day for all functions: bathroom, cooking, cleaning, everything. The average American household uses 100 gallons of water per person. We're down to 15, and those kids get along just fine. They don't stink. Their hygiene is great, but they understand the difference between needs and wants. Okay, so that's the very first principle we have to understand. Second is a principle called personal financial autonomy. What does this mean? Well, it's kind of a deep concept, but the very first level is, how long could you survive comfortably without going to a job? Well, the average American would last a couple days. Then they're out of money. Many Americans can't stay home. They can't afford to not go to work because they're living paycheck to paycheck and a little beyond that. So they have no room at all. Those of us who live on farms or ranches, yeah, we could probably go a few weeks, maybe a few months. But that's the first idea of personal financial autonomy. All right, I cannot read this because
I can read it if you want.
Yeah, please read it.
So Alexis Tocqueville from Democracy in America. Americans are constantly excited by two conflicting passions. They want to be led and they wish to remain free.
Okay, stop right there for a second. What does it mean to want to be led, but you want to be free at the same time? You want somebody to be responsible for everything, but you don't want to be accountable to them. Now, Tocqueville saw this in the 1840s. He said Americans have this weird double desire. They want to be free, but they don't want to be responsible for anything. And because of that, they're going to create a very interesting kind of government and a very interesting kind of culture in the future. And here we are today with that culture. Go ahead and read there. Start with for the past.
The past 80 years, our nation has suffered from
Innervation.
enervation. That is the act of weakening or reducing strength, which on a personal level is the lack of political will, not stepping up and taking action to stop or slow the erosion of freedom. Political will
Atrophy.
atrophies when people are less responsible for their own reality. People will become despondent, hopeless, and less responsible when they have little or no control over their personal economy or financial future. And when people cease to exercise their political will, or in other words, exercise political autonomy, politicians will gladly make those decisions for them.
So what we're saying here is this. If you live in a culture that's already starting to weaken and you don't have control of your financial future, you're just up in debt up to your eyebrows, all you can do is make money to pay off your debt. And at the end of the month, you don't feel like you got anywhere, you haven't moved forward, you don't have a savings account, nothing. When that's happening to you, you become despondent, you become hopeless, you become less responsible, which actually aggravates your situation and makes it even worse. And when you do that, you give up hope and you let the politicians run everything. And we're saying that's a problem. We don't want our students graduating from this college with that mentality. And so we're teaching them personal financial autonomy so they're never in debt and they get stronger and stronger over time, not weaker and weaker over time. All right, principle number 3, becoming anti-fragile. Now, this is a concept that's very interesting. Becoming anti-fragile means that you face reality, you clearly understand exactly what's going on in your life, and you realize there are some things I can fix, and so you fix those things. Then you realize there are some things I have no control over, but they have potential negative impact on my life. When that happens, you do things to insulate yourself from the negative effects of those bad things. For example, I know a farmer in Missouri. He was an older guy. He was one of the few guys that didn't have any kind of loans with the federal government or with banks to run his farm. He didn't get involved in any of the industrial farming stuff. And he told me that, that when you have a farm and you have a farm cycle, in fact, Will, this is the guy that you told me about long time ago. You probably don't remember because we're so old now, but and this goes with pretty much any farmer, but back in the day, you knew there was a drought cycle. You knew that a drought was coming 8 years, 10 years, you knew it was coming. So every year you would put aside some extra food and you fill up the silos and everything. And by the time you got to the drought, you had so much food saved up, you could make it through the drought, no problem, even if it was 2 years. And you had enough seed to plant that next spring when it started raining again, and you made it through. You were able to insulate yourself from the negative effects of the drought. When you're fragile versus anti-fragile, when you're fragile, this is what happens to you. I have a friend who was a pilot. He flew for a major airline for about 35 years, got a really good pension. This is back in the 80s when we still had pensions. And he bought some land in New Harmony, just south of Cedar City. And he built a house and everything. And it was all based on some money coming from Social Security, but mostly from this pension, about $2,500 or $3,000 a month from his airline. And I said, aren't you afraid that you're going to have a problem with this? Aren't you afraid you're putting all your duckies in the same basket? If that pension never goes away, you're in big trouble. He said, no, this company is too big to fail. Within 10 years of that conversation, his airline did fail. The pension dried up. He lost his house and he lost his land because he put everything in that thing and was not anticipating failure when he should have. So the third principle of the new economy is become anti-fragile. Start thinking anti-fragile. Now, I wanted to come up with a way for you to understand what anti-fragile really means. So I did some research, and what I decided to do was compare about 100 years ago to today. So if we go to 1918, the reason I picked 1918 was because that was the Spanish flu pandemic, right? Compared to the pandemic we're in now. The national debt back in those days was $24 billion. And for the population at the time, if they were to pay off $24 billion, that would have been $233 per person, just like we talked about the $900,000 that we all owe, right? Well, if you adjust that for inflation, that gives you just over $4,000 per person at that time. 100 years later, we're at about 90,000, but if you add in the unfunded obligations, we're at $900,000 in debt per person in the country. Compare that to 4,000. That gives you a real contrast. That's apples to apples. Now, I did a bunch more research. We're not going to go into that, but I am going to show you a couple items from that. By the way, all of this is in an essay that I wrote. It's a book that I'm writing right now. And if you want this essay, just reach out to me and I'll send you a PDF of it. In 1918, the average monthly income expense for the average family in America was $50 to $80. Adjusted for inflation, that was somewhere between $920 and $14, we'll call it $1,200. Today, or 2021, the average national debt. Now, look, this may not be what you're paying in Nevada or wherever you are, Jonathan. But on average across the nation, this is the closest that we could get. There are many people paying way more than $5,000 a month. There are people paying less than $5,000. But the average American family today is paying over $5,000 a month for family expense. 100 years ago, we were paying, adjusted for inflation, about $1,200. Why is it that 100 years ago, we were paying 4 times less than what we are today? Well, there's one answer to that question, and that is we're living a standard of living way beyond what we can afford. That's why if you were to live in the same house, or no, let me say that differently. If you could not borrow money, would you be living in the same house that you're in now? Well, Jared, your answer is yes. Will, your answer is yes. You didn't borrow money to live in that house. But the average American would say, no, I couldn't live in the house I'm in because I had to borrow $400,000 or $500,000 to be in this house. I don't have that kind of money. So they'd be living in something way under what they're living now. They'd be living at a standard of living way lower than they are now, which means the average American is living a false standard of living. Same with cars. If you couldn't borrow money, would you be driving the car you're driving now? Well, I don't know about you guys, but I pay cash for all my vehicles. So my answer is yes. But there are many people that have $400, $500, $600, $700, $800, not $1,000 a month car payment. That's crazy. And that's why we have such a disparity between 1918 and 2021. All right, let's keep going. Let's look at income. In 1918, the gross income was $1,500 a year. That's an annual amount. And they only spent about $700 or $800 of that. At the end of each year in 1918, they had a income surplus of 37%. They spent 60% of their income and they had 40% left over at the end of the year. In 2021, the average income, I know this seems crazy, but the average income is about $80,000 net after taxes and Medicare and Medicaid and all these things is 61. Expenses are almost 63. So you actually have a negative income at the end of the year. Now, this doesn't include credit card payments. This doesn't include vacations. This doesn't include the boats sitting out behind the house. So it could be as high as 12% negative each year. And we wonder why so many Americans are despondent and feel hopeless and helpless. Well, it's because we're living way outside our means. All right. Now, the fourth principle is a concept called means of production. This is super huge. I'm writing this chapter right now in my book, and it's amazing how many definitions I went out and found across the internet and a whole bunch of old books I have. All of them say means of production in there. The average American could not tell me what means of production is if their life depended on it. Why? Because we're so disconnected from it. Means of production is the idea, and this is kind of the public perspective or how we do it in a commercial world. Means of production is how things are purchased or how things are produced. When we go to Costco, the last thing we're thinking about is how something is produced. We're going in, we're loading up that cart, we're using that credit card, and we are making those purchases so we can go home and consume. All we're thinking about is consuming. Let's get home as quick as we can so we can crack open that ice cream and go after it, or the jerky or whatever it is, or the wee things, or yeah, that I don't know what those things are, but I know they're technology oriented. That's all we're thinking about. We're not thinking about how was this produced? What country was this produced in? What was the process that had to go through? Well, here's the process. Everything you buy at Costco or anywhere else, everybody say hi to Julia, is produced on this earth. We don't mine asteroids yet. So everything that's ever been produced on this planet up to this point all came from resources here. Your cell phone, your underwear, toilet paper, everything was produced by something created on this planet. We mine it, we harvest, we gather, we collect natural resources. There's two processes we go through. We do a gross processing. There are certain topics, for example, sugarcane. We don't use all of the sugarcane to make sugar. We extract the granules out of it and the juice out of it, and the rest of it is trash, or we use it for something else. So the gross process is we manipulate, we transform natural resources, we extract elements of that to make components for other things that we want to make. The fine processing is that we mold, we combine, layer, strip, press, and we put all these things together to create these components. Okay, we're not even at the finished product yet. Then we assemble all those components together to create the finished product. I used to be, I know this will be a shock to most of you, but I used to be a connoisseur of women's pumps. I worked in a shoe store, so I knew all about women's shoes. And those shoes don't come off a tree. The heel is made separate from this part and this part, and somebody has to combine all those parts that were created and extracted from natural resources and put all those pieces together. Then they assemble the components to a finished product. Then they have to package that product. Then they have to ship it to a warehouse where it sits for who knows how long. Then it goes from the warehouse to the wholesaler. And then the wholesaler ships it to the retailer. Then the retailer puts it on shelves. And women come in and go, oh, this is a wonderful pump. I love how high this heel is. And then they buy it, they take it home, they use it, it breaks down, they throw it in the landfill. That's the means of production process that we use today in America. But that's a process that people don't understand. The people that make shoes, they understand all this, but the average American, 99% of us don't have a clue how that process goes. But one of my mentors, a guy's long dead now, his name is Liber Education. He said, well, you got to look at it differently. You got to look at means of production from a personal perspective, from an independent perspective. Anytime you take anything from the earth, in the air, on the ground, underwater, whatever, and you change it, you transform it, you do something to it to make it more serviceable to humans, that's called wealth. For example, I find a wild potato plant and I take a stick and I dig up a potato. One of the ways I can make that potato more serviceable to me is I can heat it on some coals. I cook it, I eat it, I'm happy, that's great. Then there's labor, that makes sense, human labor. Then there's natural resources, that's the ground I dug the potato out of. Then we get to capital. Capital is an accumulation of wealth. Let's say I'm digging up potatoes with my stick and oh, voila, I find 5 potatoes and I cook all 5 right now. I can't eat 5 potatoes in one day. So what I have is, say I'm eating 1 potato a day, that allows me to have 5 days worth of food. Now I don't have to dig potatoes that day. I can go work on something else that'll improve my life while I'm eating those potatoes. That's called capital. And Liber Education says, this is how you got to see the world. You got to look at it as what natural resources can you use by applying your labor to create wealth and then create an accumulation of wealth so you can work on other projects and improve over time. Because nature is abundant, this works really well. For example, I put a grain of wheat in the ground and it grows a plant. And if I did a good job of taking care of that plant, I can get as many as 200 grains of wheat out of that one seed. That's abundance. That's capital. Then I can sell that, get some cash, or I can use it, grow some more, whatever. That's the idea. That's the 4th concept. It's also interesting when you think of means of production, when you have independent means of production, when you control means of production, money is almost never a part of this, or it's a very unimportant part. But if you don't have any control over means of production, you don't, all you do is work for money. You don't have any land. You're not trying to create stuff for yourself. All you're thinking is stuff you can buy. Everything is about money. It's really interesting. There are some laws here of means of independent means of production. Now, let me stop right here before we go through this. Does anybody have any questions about what means of production means? Is this pretty clear? Give me a thumbs up if it's clear. Okay.
I think,
All right.
I think,
Go ahead.
Shannon, one of the issues that we have is that in our current economy, we're not producers, we're largely consumers
Yeah.
of goods. And so we don't really even have that connection of what it means to be a producer and how things can produce, because we're so far removed from natural systems.
That's totally true. In fact, even those who are in a ranching or farming environment, we're primarily consumers. Why? Because we monoculture, right? True Georgics is a polyculture arrangement. We have 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 different kinds of vegetables growing. We have livestock, but we don't just have cows or horses or pigs. We have cows, horses, and pigs, and chickens, and rabbits. It's smaller scale maybe, but we have a lot of different things because all these different cultures interact with each other. And we're not just growing wheat only. We're not just growing potatoes only. We do all of it, and primarily for our own benefit, and then we sell a surplus. That's a very different mentality than industrial farming or ranching today. Okay, Jerry, can you read these for me? They're cut off. I can't read them.
Yeah, independent means of production principles. All consumables are created through the means of production.
Okay, that's pretty basic, right? If you've got a product, and it's not, you know, you didn't pick it off the ground. Even if you picked it off the ground, you're literally lifting off the ground. That's making that more. For example, let's use this example. Apples on a tree. Well, I didn't do anything. The tree just grew the apples. Yes, but you picked that apple. You cleaned it. Now it's more serviceable. Or you took that apple and you cut it up and you provided it for somebody at your table, or you made applesauce out of it, or apple crisp or something. You're transforming it. So anything that's consumed has gone through a means of production process.
Independent means of production, your level of liberty and security is in direct relation to your consumption versus how much you produce.
So liberty and consumption and production have a relationship. Your liberty increases as you produce more and more of what you consume. Your liberty decreases as you consume more and more of what other people produce. Now, this doesn't mean don't trade eggs for honey. It doesn't mean that. It just means understand there's a direct relationship to consumption and production to liberty. And you have to look at that every time you engage in these transactions. You have to look at that. If all you do is make money at your job and everything you have to consume, you have to go buy, and you don't know how to make any of those things, you have very little liberty. If you produce half of what you consume, that changes your liberty. Your liberty goes up quite a bit. If Will's producing all this food out there in his greenhouses, his Wallapini and all this, he's very secure when it comes to food. He probably doesn't have to ever go. He might still like oranges, and maybe he goes, we got to get that Wallapini producing citrus, buddy. But in the meantime, he has to go get oranges somewhere else. He doesn't want to do that. So he's going to work on his Wallapini till it gets to a point where it produces his own oranges. He never has to go to the grocery store, ever. That's called 100% liberty. That's called independence. Go ahead. Just the one that's bold there.
Yep. Okay. You are as free as you are independent of goods and services produced by others.
Okay. I basically just said that. Okay. Here's the 4 principles of the new economy. Now we're going to get to the good stuff here. Just a second. Standard of living versus quality of life. You've got to have that relationship in your head. What is personal financial autonomy? What are you doing to accomplish it? What is anti-fragile? What are you doing to accomplish it? What are the means of production? You have to have three things for means of production. For you to control your own means of production, you have to have land, you have to have labor, and you have to have capital, something that allows you to work on these two and not have to have a job all the time. Okay. Doesn't have to be a lot of capital, but you have to have some. Those are the three things. If you have those three things, you can engage in your own independent means of production. If you don't have those things, then it's pretty tough. Okay. Let's take a look at a solution. The solution is the new economy. We're not talking about some alternative lifestyle. You don't have to wear a special kind of clothes. You don't have to dye your hair blue. This is not the idea that you go live out in a boonies somewhere. This isn't typical concept of homesteading, although homesteading you could homestead and do this. The average person who homesteads is not doing this. And it doesn't mean just going off grid. Off grid is an interesting statement. A lot of people think being off grid means, boy, you're a prepper, you're out there, you're disconnected. Well, that's not true. In fact, most people who are off grid, who are off the electrical grid, are still completely tied into the economic grid. And as long as you're still tied into the economic grid, it doesn't matter how cool your bug out cabin is. If you don't know how to grow food, I have a lot of people, I was just talking to a guy today, I have a lot of people who have seeds in their food storage. Boy, we're ready. Something happens, we got seeds. Well, Mr. DeMille right here will tell you that if you don't know how to use those seeds, you're 2 to 3 years out of being pretty good at growing food. Well, that's a long time to fast. So you better be growing food now on a regular basis. Then those seeds might help you. But even then, let's say Mr. DeMille is a great farmer, and which he is. If he doesn't have food stored for the winter time, he's waiting 45 days for those radishes to mature. That's still a long time to fast. So you better have this all worked out and be thinking through this. So off grid, if you're still attached to the economic grid, you're still in trouble. All right, what the new economy is, it's living without debt. Debt. We're going to hit this a million times. It's family, community oriented. It's striving for 100% self-reliance. It's having a personal means of production engaged in that, and it's creating some sort of homestead and farmstead. You can do this in an urban environment. Personally, I wouldn't, because I don't like urban environments, but you could do this. There are people growing lots of food in urban environments. Kansas City, the urban farm guys, they're doing fantastic things there. It's just more difficult. Not only is it difficult to get land, you have to deal with a lot more government regulation. There's all kinds of things that are there that make it a lot more difficult, but it is possible. I recommend a more rural application of the new economy, but you can do it in an urban environment, no problem. Okay, this is kind of a new age of pioneering. Let's get into it. There's 5 elements here to do the new economy. Now, I'm going to be talking to you as if you're Monticello College students, okay? There are 5 elements to this that we teach at Monticello College. One is Liber Education with no debt. There's no student debt when you graduate from the school. You have to be able to secure your home and land with no mortgage, no debt. You have to have an independent, no debt food source. At least 95% is what we're shooting for. Not everybody can grow oranges, but that better be all you're buying from the store, right? Independent, no debt home energy source and an independent family business. These are the 5 elements for what we're calling the new economy. And now we're going to take time to show you how to do all those. Okay, here we go. So the first phase is the Liber Education. Why do you need one? To get a Liber Education, remember, a Liber Education is a combination of the manual arts combined with the liberal arts. That's what we're calling a Liber Education. And there's a lot to it. And when you combine those 2 things together, you develop a skill set to become a very centered person, have the ability to experience a very happy and successful marriage, raise a family, independently provide for your family, have the knowledge and the ability to think through difficult situations. We're going into a lot of those right now. Can you follow the dictates of your own conscience? Do you even know what that means? And a Liber education helps you have the skill set to do that, be able to contribute to your community and make a positive, independent, positive impact on the world. That's why you need a Liber education. On campus at Monticello College, we have combined the manual arts with the liberal arts. After a 4-year program with us, we have students that can leave and successfully navigate these aspects of life and do very well at them. So you span 4 years. Now, if you look at the ages, 17 to 21, that's the age group I deal with. I've had many people who've seen this lecture live, who've come to me who are in their 30s, 40s, even 50s, and said, okay, but your ages were starting at 17. You think I could do this? Yes, of course. Just plug in 50, plug in 30, 45, whatever, and start there. But you got to have this education. You can't do this fully to the extent that we're suggesting here unless you've got this education. Maybe it takes you a lot longer to get it. That's okay, but you've got to have it. So once you get this education, you've got your diploma in your hand, you've graduated, you're excited. Phase 2 is that you move back home, live in your parents' basement, and you eat their food. And while you're doing that, you go get as many jobs as you possibly can, 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and you work your brains out so that you can get your $30,000 to $40,000 startup cash. Remember, you can't start this from debt, so you've got to have some leverage. You've got to have some capital. In our world, that means cash right now anyway. So you got to go raise that. If you are working 50 hours a week at $15 an hour, you could raise $30,000, not spending any of it because you're living in your mom's basement, eating her food. You could raise $30,000 in 10 months. Imagine what you could do if you're working 80 hours a week at $15 an hour. You could have $30,000 or $40,000 in 6 to 8 months. And that's what you do. You have your diploma, you put it aside, you put it on your grubbies, you go work your 2 or 3 jobs, you don't have a social life, no dating, maybe shower, you eat your mom's food, and you raise $30,000 or $40,000. You knock that out as fast as possible. Okay, everybody with me? Now, while you're doing that, you're thinking about securing land. Now, at Monticello College, we taught you permaculture, biodynamics. We taught you all the criteria you need to look for the kind of piece of land you want that you need for what you're doing. And so you're looking for land right now. Now, some people say, well, how in the world could you buy 10 acres for $30,000? I can show you places right now all over the country where you can buy land for $1,000 or less an acre. It's not in a city. It's not in Provo. It's not in, I don't know any cities up north in Nevada. Elko, is that a city up there? It's not in Elko. It might be 20 miles outside of Elko, but you can't do this with this small amount of startup cash in a city, but there's plenty of places outside of cities where you can find land like this. So you're looking for your land while you're putting in your 60, 70, 80 hours a week. While you're making all this money, you're thinking about land, you're looking for a piece of land, and when your spare time, what little bit you have, you're working on temporary housing. For years now, I've had students who show up here, either single or married couples, living in little travel trailers of about 200 square feet. And they live all through the school year. I've had people living here in tiny little situations all year round. We have learned how to live in tiny housing. Right now, Julie and I live in a tiny house that we built on campus. We built this about 1.5 years ago, and this is what we live in now. It's 400 square feet. I have a house right in town, a mile away, that's 2,400 square feet. But we chose to live here because we're telling the students that they have to do this. We want to make sure that we're showing them how to do this. Also, a hidden benefit of living in a place this small, you're going to love this, Will. There's no room for visitors. Nobody can come visit, really. So sorry, too bad. Okay. So now, by the time you get your $30,000, your $40,000 saved up, now you're approaching the world from a cash position, not a debt position. And it took you less than a year to do that. And you're 21 years old. You're 22 years old. What do you care? Follow this path. We're going to have you living in a high standard of living in very short time. So you have this cash, you've got your land, you figured out where that is, you've got your temporary housing. As soon as you get your 30,000, you're all done with that. You move your temporary housing onto your land, you move in. Now you're the king of the kingdom. You are in a house that with no debt, and you have land with no debt. You're in a position that 90% of America can't even imagine. And you are feeling pretty good about life, and you're 22 years old, 23 years old. Now it's time to start your business from a no debt perspective. Now, there's a lot of businesses that are service-oriented businesses. For example, you might have Selena's Housekeeping. Now, Selena, don't do what I'm telling you. I'm just going to say that this, you could do this, but don't do this. Selena's Housekeeping, which works great. She makes a lot of money cleaning people's houses until the economy contracts, until things get really expensive. Pretty soon, all the people, Mrs. Smith is having Selena clean her house. Next thing you know, Mrs. Smith is saying, sorry, Selena, I'm gonna have to clean my own house now. I can't afford it anymore. Now she's out of a business. You want a inflation-proof business in place, and that is a commodity-based business. Anything to do with food works really well. Blacksmithing. I know a guy who's a blacksmith. He does art. That's all he does right now is blacksmithing art, metal art. But he has the ability to change in a heartbeat and start making hooks and hinges and all kinds of other things that actually have utility to them. He could do that with blacksmithing. So that works. Baker, woodworker, all those kinds of things. Let's say that you're a baker. Let's say you make bread. Some of you are familiar with a company called Abigail's Oven. I've been involved with Abigail's Oven from the very beginning. And in fact, Martha and Alan, who own that business with their kids, were students of mine way back. And Abigail, who is the namesake for Abigail's Oven, is a student on campus here in April. It takes about $1 to make a loaf of really awesome sourdough bread. They're selling their sourdough bread right now for $8 to $10 a loaf. It's crazy, right? But you have to have a no debt business. So if you have no debt on your business and it only costs you $1 to make a loaf of bread and you're selling for $8, you have a $7 profit margin. If you have a no debt business and the economy gets really hard and people are struggling and suffering, you have the ability to charge less for your bread and still make a profit. Does that make sense? Go like this, if that makes sense. Which means you're in a position to help other people during hard times. But if you have a debt business, if you have a mortgage on a building that you have your business in, and the economy crunches, less people are buying your product, your bread, less people can afford bread because they can't afford $8 bread anymore. You have to shut down your bakery because you can't lower your price because it's priced at what you need to pay your mortgage and everything else. That's why you have to have no debt businesses. Okay, that's phase two. Actually, there's more to phase two. You have to start growing food. So last year we had a guy who got married 1 week before school started. This poor girl, she had no idea what she was getting into. He brought his bride here 1 week after they got married and moved into a 250 square foot little trailer. They had a porta potty. They had to come down to the Lyceum to take showers. This was not exactly what she was anticipating, I think, when she started dating this guy. However, she's young and she's resilient and she could do that for a while. So guys, you know, or gals, you have your land, you have your little temporary housing on there. You get married, you bring your spouse on with you, but it's an adventure. It's exciting because you're in your 20s and everything is exciting when you're in your 20s. And you can put up with a lot of nonsense in your 20s and you can be very, very low cost, okay? So take a couple days off when you move in your trailer, start growing food, and start building your permanent house. You're not going to live in this trailer forever. In fact, guys, you got about 5 or 6 years. Your new wife will put up with this for 5 or 6 years. And then after that, she probably won't put up with it much. So what you do is you don't build all 2,000 square feet of your home. You start with 800 square feet and you work on that for 5 or 6 years. You're taking any extra money you have, you put into it, no debt again. By the time she's just about had it with that tiny house that you're living in, you can move her out of the 200 square feet into the 800 square feet, and she'll think she just moved into the Taj Mahal. And then you start working on the next part of that house. By the time you're at this place for 10 years, you have a permanent house finished, no debt. You have land paid for, no debt. You have a business you've been running for 8 or 10 years now, no debt, providing 5 or 6 times what you need to live. You have a no debt situation, and it only took you 10 years to get there. What you did was see, where is that? There's a phrase on here. There it is, right there. You leveraged your age. You sacrificed 10 years of standard of living so that you could have 60 to 80 years of high standard of living and quality of life. Now, in our culture today, we do this backwards. When we start out after college, we get into all this kind of debt. We have high standard of living, but we're doing it way outside of what we can afford. We have all this debt load. It's so stressful. We live that way for 40 or 50 or 60 years. Then when we retire, we have nothing to show for it, maybe a house, but we have no money to live on because Social Security isn't working. Now we have to get rid of the house. We have to downsize. It's a nightmare. Downsize up front. Spend 10 years of living at the lowest level you possibly can. Save all your money, put all your effort into creating no debt scenarios so that by the time you're 35 years old, watch what happens here. So you got your business going, you go into phase 3. Now it becomes a master. In phase 2, you raised your money, you got your land, you got your temporary house, you start your business, you start growing food, you start working on first phase of your house, of your permanent house. You're under 30 years old by that time. Then you become an expert. Yeah, you've been making bread for 5 years, but now you need to develop a very close symbiotic relationship with bacteria. You got to become a master of how bread is built. Guess what? You can expand your income by putting on workshops of how to make bread now. I have lots of friends who are actually doing this. They make money showing other people how to make bread. Is that going to shoot you in the foot? Is that going to take away from your clientele for people who want to buy bread that you make? No. Only about 10% of the population is ever going to make their own bread in the next 20 years. But you can make more money by having workshops. You can expand like crazy. You become a master, you grow more food, you take all that surplus money that you've made and you put it in, you finish your house. Now, by the time you get to phase 3 of this thing, phase 3 right there. Phase 4 rather. By the time you get to phase 4, you're somewhere between 30 and 35 years old. Where are you? You have a house paid for, a nice house that you built. I don't think people understand what it means to live in a house you built yourself. It is a very exciting proposition. Hold on a second. I got to check one thing here. It is a very exciting proposition to live in a house you built. That means every wall, every piece of that floor, that door, that window, everything has meaning to you. And your kids help you build it too, right? So by the time they're 35, you have land that you paid for, you have a house that's paid for, you have a business that's providing 3 to 5 times what you need, and you have a reputation now in your community as being debt-free, and you can help people. You can get involved civically, you can get involved in helping other people do this themselves, you can hold all kinds of workshops. There is so much you can do to help society. I have friends, including Jared, who are trying to do this very same thing right now. We got started a little later than 35, Jared, but we still can have impact. That's the idea. That's the new economy. Within 10 years of graduating from college, you could be living a standard of living equal or greater than your contemporaries, your friends, and living at a 80% discount from what they're living. If you have a mortgage, if you have no mortgage and no household expenses like that, no utilities, that kind of thing, you can have your home 40% cheaper than everybody else around you. It's a 42% decrease on household expenses. If you have a car that you don't have a car payment on, that's on average 16% decrease. If you grow all your own food, that's a 21% decrease on monthly expenses. That's 80%. You're living at a standard of living equal or greater than your friends within the first, by the first 10 years, 80% under what they're spending. You don't have the stress they have. And you're your own man, your own woman. You have your own business. This is the new economy. The problem is bankruptcy. The solution is the new economy. Now, why don't you guys all unmute yourself? You can ask any questions you want. I'm going to walk you through some pictures of what it looks like to be on our campus. Okay, so while I'm doing this, there's no audio or anything. So go ahead and unmute if you want to ask questions. I'll walk you through. So, right, just to clarify, the student here is not the goat. It's the girl, but you know, behind the goat. This is a hen house and a barn that we have on campus. Our students grow food from seeds. They propagate the seeds all the way through. They make the food, they make the meals, all the way to preserving the food. This right here is a bunch of chicken soup that we made. This was probably 50 gallons of chicken soup that we made from a bunch of chickens that we harvested. And we just cooked it all up in a couple of really big pots, and then we canned it all. It was pretty tasty. Again, all kinds of growing food. You can see the size of these carrots and onions and stuff over here. We teach our students manual arts. Here, this girl, whose name was Haley, she's running a backhoe. I learned to check and make sure the students actually had driver's license before I put them on the backhoe. I learned that the hard way. On campus, we heat with wood. We do a little bit of propane as well, but 90% of our heating is with wood. And so we cut 10 to 15 cords a year. The students do all the cutting and all the heating. This is a large classroom we have called the Great Room in the Lyceum. This room can hold about 150 people. This is a smaller classroom. This holds about 20 to 25 people max. Here you can see it. We're making our own sourdough bread here. This student is up in that tree. That big blob up there is one of our hives swarmed. So he's up there capturing those bees. Here they're plastering in a straw bale building that we built. On the other side is me giving chainsaw lessons to a student with great trepidation, I must add. A little bit of student life here. Another mentor teaching. We do a lot of trek, a lot of hiking. This happens to be in a dark wilderness area, a couple hours from campus. We had a great time back in there. Beautiful. The students build all their own buildings on campus. And so here they're pouring a slab. This was just this last fall, right before it got cold. This is a 40 by 40 slab. We're going to build a 40 by 40 straw bale building this year. That'll be the first permanent dormitory on campus. Our ground is so horrible that the best way we found to deal with it is to have these grow boxes and start developing our soil that way. Eventually we'll get rid of the boxes, but right now that's the best way for us to do it. Second Amendment is very important, we think, and I think the number one reason why people are anti-Second Amendment is because they're afraid of guns. So we encourage our students to shoot guns a lot on campus, and pretty soon they're no longer afraid of guns, and so that solves the problem. These are goose eggs and chicken eggs. To the left is our pantry, and you can see there we have a supply of toilet paper. We're never going to get caught without toilet paper again. On campus, the rule kind of is if there's no meat in the freezer and you want meat, go down to the barn and there's meat running around. Knock yourself out. More hiking. We teach all kinds of skills, trek skills, survival skills, that kind of thing. This is Monticello Lake. It's just about 3 minutes from campus. It's a real pretty area. We teach a lot of different kinds of alternative no deck construction. These girls here are working on what's called compressed earth blocks. And you build a wall out of these blocks. Each block is about 30 pounds. You can see there's mortar between those layers. If you, now this wall happens to be underneath a 9-foot overhang. You don't need 9-foot overhang. We just happen to have those. But a 3 or 4 foot overhang, and you put a nice plaster, lime plaster coating on the outside, that wall will last about 300 years. We've kind of gravitated to straw bale buildings now. And so we've built one of these already. You can see at the bottom there, that you can see the concrete slab, and then you can see at the top of that wall, that's called a box beam. From that slab to the box beam, and then the roof that we built on top of this, we had this entire building up in 3 days. Okay, we have a couple programs on campus called micro semesters. A micro semester is where we embed students from the ages of 16 and up on campus. So basically we take a 26-day period, can be any time that we decide through the school year, and we'll give you the books they're covering during that time. And then you come on campus and boom, you embed yourself right into the culture. You do everything that a regular student does for 26 days. At the end of 26 days, 2 things are evident. Either you love the place or you hate it. We have about a 70% return rate. Students who do a micro semester either come back and do another micro semester, or they come on campus as a full-time student. We have a straw bale construction workshop this year. This is the project that the students are doing, but we're letting people come in and join us on this project. It's for 5 or 6 days. And this is all on the website, monticellocollege.org. This just shows you that comparing residential colleges across the nation, in-state, public out-of-state, private, nonprofit, and then our school, our tuition is about 10. You factor in tuition and room and board, it's about 10,000 a year compared to 21, 37, or 48,000. And it's much cheaper than the average college in America. That's about it. Any questions?
Thank you,
Amber, no
Shannon.
questions. Go ahead, Jared.
No, thank you very much. Appreciate you jumping on, and yeah, I think it was a great way to learn. Great way to learn. So I'll go ahead and stop the recording.